Right, what do I need to do with my website to make sure that it's compliant with GDPR? Is there anything that needs to be done? So, for example, we've got a normal info site, you've got a membership site and a shop. So do you want to go for info site first?
Yeah. Okay, so for any website, you will need to update that information for your terms and conditions and your privacy policy. So your privacy policy needs to recognise that you are handling cookies and you're not responsible for third-party website or content. That's standard as normal data protection rules now. Include information about your ICO registration as well.
Okay.
But the privacy policy does need to be updated. Within that privacy policy, you will need to have some information relating to a subject access request. Subjects are what the European Union call consumers, and they have the right to ask for information on what you may hold on them.
Okay.
They have this right now, but from the 25th of May it's slightly different. You've got 30 days to supply that information, and they then have the right to come back to you and ask you to correct any information, or they can have the right to be forgotten.
Okay.
So this is simply known as the right to be forgotten. So you will need a policy that explains how they do that, but within the privacy policy you need to make them aware they have the right to be forgotten. So the right to be forgotten means a consumer says, I no longer wish you to remember me or my business with you, and you simply delete them, and that's their right to do that.
But we need to make sure that we log that we've deleted them.
Yes, so maintain a log
Yeah.
that information has been deleted.
But obviously, do you just say, I've deleted it, put like their name? You wouldn't hold their data.
Correct.
You'd have to
That's
delete
it.
the data, but just say this person.
Yeah, so you would say, this person,
Blogs.
Joe Blogs, has requested on such and such a date to be for the right to be forgotten, and that was completed on such and such a date. As long as you've got a record of it, that's that. In case, the reason you need this is in case the consumer feels their privacy has been violated and they've received information or unwanted correspondence, and they think you might be responsible. In case you get any inquiries for that, you can say, yes, I remember that person, we have forgotten them, and we haven't sent them anything. And
So you would just have a separate folder or
Correct.
file where you just, like a spreadsheet, where you just say,
Yeah.
these people are forgotten on these dates.
Yes, indeed.
Nice and easy.
So you should have an internal policy as well about subject access requests. So who deals with it? Who are they addressed to? How is that processed? With remembering the key information. Don't forget anything. So if you've got credit card information, tell them what it is, how it was obtained, etc., and you've got 30 days to comply with that.
So really we want a checklist, don't we?
A checklist.
Checklist of what we need to give somebody when they ask for data,
Right.
of what we need to do if they ask to be forgotten,
Yes.
and kind of who is dealing with what's part of the manual type thing.
Yep, absolutely.
So what about HTTPS? Because that's obviously part of it as well.
That's right. So for websites that are not just info sites but are shops as well, wholly recommended that they are HTTPS.
You need HTTPS for info. It's beneficial, isn't it? Because Google now rank you down if you don't have a secure site.
That's right. So if you're not a secure site, you will be harder for new consumers to find you for you to do business with them. So it's a very simple and quick process, and it's very relatively cheap as well to have done. It's a necessary step. So Google, Edge, Chrome, everybody, all the major search engines recommend that you are an HTTPS.
So you get your little padlock, and
You
it's
have
all
your little
green
padlock.
tick.
Yeah, green tick, and
Everybody's
and
happy.
McAfee and all those other good people will include you in a safe search. So entirely recommended. More information is obviously going to be stored because they're going to be accessing information and supplying you with credit card details, etc. So
That's for shops.
That's for shops.
Yeah.
So again, very important that information is stored securely, safely. Ideally, it needs to be in a password protected environment. Even more ideally, it can be anonymized, so it's not easy to recognize that Joe Bloggs' credit card information is this, and that's his postal address. And there are tips about how you can do that on various sites. So it's not too difficult to work out how to do password protection, etc.
So, because obviously there's different types of membership site and shop, isn't there? So for some people, they'll have a site which is their plugin on their website and all of the data is in that place. They might likely be using a third-party service for payment like PayPal or SagePay or something. So that side, they're compliant and they need to ask for the compliance information from those third-party people.
Yes, so if it was me and I had a shop and I was using SagePay or WorldPay, for example, I would go to them and ask them for their details of their privacy policy and who their data controller was and what their policies were in terms of protection and maintenance of consumer data. Very important. All you have to do is get a printout of that and that acts as your documentation that you've attempted compliance and that there's a record that it's existed. So once again, it's another tick box that you've done your very best to comply with GDPR.
So the payment processing done.
Yes.
So then you're just left with the actual consumer, the client, the data subjects information, which is the membership site. So you might have birth date.
Yeah.
You might have obviously name, address, telephone number, and things like that.
Right.
If that is a plugin on your own website.
Yes.
And you have to obviously log in to the website.
Yes.
That's slightly different to if you were using, say, for example, Infusionsoft or some of the other web platforms out there where you can run your membership site on them. They presumably will be GDPR compliant, so
Correct.
you get the information from them like the third-party payment.
Right. So by the virtue of the fact that they volunteered the information, they're supplying with you information willingly, the consent is implied. So you don't necessarily need consent from a consumer for anything, funnily enough. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But the fact that they volunteered their information on your site...
Because they've joined and they're paying or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, or even if they're just subscribing for free information or marketing,
Yeah.
the consent is implied. So it's slightly different from the shop scenario.
Okay. But if their data is just on your website and you've got access to it, you need to have something in place for yourself for
Right.
that. Or some proof that it's secure with the
Yes.
logins, or you've got
Correct.
some sort of security plugins in place to protect the data.
Right, so once again, making sure that the data is stored in a secure environment, preferably not in the same place where you're working, it's off-site. It can be in a flash drive or it can be in the cloud, wherever. But again, as long as it's separated from the machine on where you've gathered the information, that's an additional security step that the Information Commissioner will approve.
Oh, that's a whole nother thing. So that would be, for example, a membership. If you were running a membership club,
Yeah,
aside from a website, so
Yeah.
the data's not on the website, you've got it all filled in on your computer because you've got, I don't know, you run a Weight Watchers club or you've got a rugby club or you've got a little taekwondo group and they're coming to you regularly.
yeah.
But they've like a membership thing, then you've got that access for that as well.
Yeah, so we would advise that you keep it separate from wherever the access mechanism is. That's because of potential security violation. It could be down to a hack or it could be down to data loss, theft. Keep it separate. It make it harder for anybody to access or get somebody else's data, which then becomes compromised. So something we're going to be talking about later is what happens if I commit a data breach. We'll talk about that one later.
And staff, obviously.
Staff training,
Because
very
if you've
important.
got a VA who's working on your website,
Yes.
they get access to the members' information.
Right.
So you've got that element as well.
We've got that element
into
as well. So
a contract?
Yes. So hopefully you will have an employment contract with any member of staff. Appreciate small businesses don't always have employment contracts, but it's a legal requirement, and of course an employee would ordinarily want one.
And
to give them,
outsourcers, obviously.
yes, exactly. Contractors and what have you. So it will need to be clear within their working terms and contract that they may have access to personal information. And then it's down to you as a business to restrict access to that information to only those that absolutely need it. So a person that's responsible within the business for IT and security, if you have a dedicated person, they're going to do it. Receptionist, they may not have access to all of it, and you can restrict that information if possible. You might just have the name and a contact number, but training is important as well. So it might only be once a year, but at least if your personnel and your staff are trained at least once a year about GDPR and what the legal requirements are, you can then again demonstrate that you've tried to be compliant.
So basically, if you've not got contracts in place, even with outsourcers,
Yeah.
they need to have separate logins so you can remove their
Correct.
access.
Yes.
You need to have a contract in place with them, even if
Right.
it's really basic, just to
Yeah.
say you're not going to mess about or share this data anywhere else.
Correct.
And just make sure you've got all your ducks in a row, really, in terms of paperwork, so you can
Right.
just prove that you're being compliant.
Consumers, data subjects, expect the rights, and they'll get bombarded with information leading up to and just after GDPR coming into law, that they'll then have all these new rights. And I'm sure there'll be some people that can't wait to find out what information that they've got. So they'll expect it. They'll expect their data to be protected. So fully cognizant of the fact that small businesses may not have all these procedures in place, but you still have time to work towards getting that done.